Hello, and welcome to the OMS Vendor Portal tutorial. The purpose of this video is to give an introduction to the vendor portal and demonstrate the types of actions that can be taken in the portal. What is Vendor Portal? Vendor Portal is an online tool developed by IBM to give vendors who are not using EDI better visibility into their orders. Vendor Portal dynamically updates GSA's Order Management Services System, or OMS, where orders are tracked by GSA. It also enables automatic communications with customers through the system. What can vendors do in the portal? In the Vendor Portal, vendors are able to view orders, acknowledge or partially acknowledge orders, cancel orders, accept or reject order cancellation requests, request back orders, request item substitutions, and post shipment information. Why can't vendors continue to use fax orders? GSA has issued an operational notice which requires vendors to use EDI or Vendor Portal in each new contract issued. Vendor Portal modernizes GSA processes to industry standards and also resolves the current lack of order and shipment visibility for both vendors and customers. How does a vendor search for and acknowledge a purchase order in Vendor Portal? Let's begin by viewing an order in the OMS application console, which is the GSA internal view of a purchase order. As you can see, the purchase order we are viewing contains one line, which is in PO sent to vendor status. This means that a purchase order has been created and transmitted to a vendor for fulfillment. Now, let's log in to Vendor Portal to see how that same order looks from the vendor's perspective in the portal. In order to log in to Vendor Portal, vendors are issued a username and password by GSA. Passwords can be easily changed using the Change Password link. Vendors are only able to view purchase orders related to his or her vendor DUNS number. In other words, vendors are only able to see orders in the system for the company they are registered under and not others. On the home page, under Purchase Order Management, the user sees a search screen allowing them to input parameters to search for a specific order. It is important to note that the status defaults to Sent to Vendor, and it is recommended that the status be changed to All when conducting a search. After entering search parameters and clicking Search, the vendor is shown a list of all purchase orders matching the search criteria with high-level details related to the order. To view the purchase order record, select the purchase order number. On the next screen, vendors are able to see all details related to the order, including header-level details, line-level details, and footer information. To see a more traditional view of a purchase order, vendors can click on Print PDF to see the PO Form 3186. Vendors are able to execute a limited number of functions depending on the status of the order. Most of the actions a vendor will take are within the line-level details. In the line-level details, vendors are able to partially or fully acknowledge an order, partially or fully cancel an order, accept or reject an order cancellation request, or request a substitute or backorder item. To acknowledge a line item, vendors select Acknowledge from the drop-down menu, and then click Update Line Item. On the next screen, the vendor confirms that the below line item information is the information they would like to acknowledge, and confirm the transaction by clicking Acknowledge. After the transaction is complete, the vendor sees the message, Info, Acknowledge Line Item Successful. Now, let's go back to the internal GSA OMS application console to see the effect this action has had on the order. You can now see that the order has changed from a PO sent to vendor status to acknowledged by vendor status. How do vendors post a shipment for an acknowledged order in the vendor portal? The vendor may issue a shipment for an acknowledged order by searching for that order, opening the order details, and clicking on PO Shipments at the top of the page. To create a new shipment on the next page, the vendor clicks on the Create New Shipment button. Next, the vendor must enter shipment details, including either the estimated or actual ship date, the carrier, and the tracking number. Note that the TCN number is auto-populated. At the bottom of the screen, the vendor selects which order lines the shipment pertains to, ensures that the quantity to be shipped is correct, or they may edit it as needed to create a partial shipment, and then clicks Create Shipment. The system then asks the vendor to confirm the shipment, as it cannot be modified after it is posted. To confirm, click OK. On the next screen, the vendor receives a confirmation message that the shipment has been posted. Going back to OMS Application Console again, you can see that the order in OMS has changed status to shipped. If there is a customer contact on the order with an associated email address, the customer will receive this shipment notification by email. The title of the email states Shipment Confirmation of GSA Global Supply Order with the order number at the end. The notification states the requisition number, item name, quantity shipped, ship date, tracking number, TCN number, and the status. How does a vendor partially acknowledge an order and post a shipment for a partial quantity? A vendor might partially acknowledge an order if they could not immediately meet the current quantity requested by the customer. The remaining orders are not yet canceled, backordered, or substituted, but they remain open and pending for action by the vendor. In order to partially acknowledge an order, the vendor would open an order in the vendor portal that is currently in Sent to Vendor status. The vendor can select the option Partial Acknowledge in the Line Level Details drop-down menu and click Update Line Item. The vendor is then asked to confirm what quantity of this line item should be partially acknowledged, and then click Partial Acknowledge. On the next screen, the vendor sees a confirmation message that the order was successfully partially acknowledged. In the line level detail, the vendor can see the status of all quantities on the order. This order now shows that 40 units have been acknowledged and 10 units remain in a pending Sent to Vendor status. To show you the effect this action had from an internal GSA point of view, let's switch back to the OMS Application Console, the internal GSA view of the purchase order. After refreshing the order, you can see that the status has changed to partially acknowledged by vendor. To post a shipment for this partially acknowledged order, the vendor navigates to the Order Details screen, which we already had open, and clicks on PO Shipments. Next, the vendor clicks on Create New Shipment on the bottom right side of the screen. The vendor must enter either the estimated ship date or the actual ship date, the carrier, TCN number, which is auto-populated, and tracking number. Next, the vendor selects which line to ship and what quantity to ship. It is important to note that vendors can only ship for the quantity that they have acknowledged. Since we only acknowledged 40 units, we can only ship 40 units or less on this order. The other 10 may be shipped after they are acknowledged. To finish the shipment, the vendor clicks Create Shipment. The vendor receives a confirmation message on the next screen that indicates the entry of the shipment confirmation has been successfully processed. To view the effect this action had for internal GSA users, let's again switch to the OMS application console and refresh the order. You can now see that the order is in a partially shipped status, meaning that the full quantity on the order has not been shipped. How does a vendor cancel a purchase order? To cancel a purchase order, the vendor opens the purchase order details, scrolls to the line level details, selects Cancel from the drop-down menu, and clicks Update Line Item. On the next screen, the vendor confirms that they would like to cancel this entire line item by clicking Cancel Item. The order then moves to a canceled status. To see the effect this has on the internal GSA view of the order, let's switch to OMS Application Console and refresh the order. You can now see that the order status has changed to canceled. What happens when a vendor receives a cancellation request? If there is a cancellation request for any reason, for example, a customer-generated request, a GSA user will input the request in OMS, which puts the order in a Cancel Requested status. If a vendor sees an order in this status, they must either accept or reject the cancellation. A vendor may reject the cancellation request if, for example, they have already shipped the order. To reject a cancellation, the vendor would select Reject Cancellation. However, we are going to accept the cancellation by selecting Cancel and clicking Update Line Item. The next screen asks the vendor to confirm the cancellation. To confirm, click Cancel Item. The order then moves to a canceled status in both Vendor Portal and in OMS. How does a vendor request to backorder an item? To request a backorder, the vendor scrolls to the line level detail and selects Backorder from the drop-down menu. On the next screen, the vendor confirms the quantity to backorder, enters the estimated ship date, and clicks Request Backorder. The vendor then sees a confirmation message stating Backorder line item successful and can view in the order notes that the backorder request was received and an alert was created for manual review. The alert that was created is for GSA internal use. To approve the backorder request, a GSA user would log into OMS Call Center to open the alert, scroll to the bottom of the alert, and accept the backorder request. Looking again at the order in the vendor portal, you can see that after the GSA user has accepted the backorder, the order is moved to Acknowledged by Vendor status and is now available to ship. How does a vendor create an item substitution request? To request a substitution, the vendor scrolls to the line level detail, selects Substitution from the drop-down menu, and clicks Update Line Item. On the next screen, the vendor enters the substitute item ID and confirms the quantity to be substituted, then clicks Substitute. Similarly to the backorder request, the substitution request generates an alert for manual review by a GSA user in call center. The GSA user must open the alert, scroll to the bottom, and either accept or reject the substitution request. For additional information, please visit the GSA website at https://www.gsa.gov/portal/content/151,058.